Chapter 1. The House at the Edge. The village was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and smaller still in the winter months, when the fields lay frozen and the nights stretched long. It was a place of simple routines, the clatter of hooves in the morning, the chiming of the chapel bell at dusk, and the closing of shutters long before midnight. But beyond the last lamppost, past the tangled hedge where the road narrowed, there stood a house that belonged to no one. Children whispered about it, inventing games of dare. Run to the step, touch the door, and back before the shadows catch you. Adults avoided it without words, and when pressed, they always gave the same reason: it isn't safe. The house leaned against the dark like an old drunk against a wall. Its shutters drooped from rusted hinges, ivy strangled its bricks, and the roof sagged as though it longed to collapse. By day, it seemed nothing more than a ruin, but by night, villagers swore, the house murmured. The stories varied. Some said it spoke in sighs, like an old man dreaming. Others claimed it whispered their names when they passed too close, and the boldest swore they had heard full sentences, warnings in a voice older than the house itself. None stayed long enough to be certain. It was into this village, on a late autumn night, that a traveler arrived. He was tall, with weary eyes and boots worn to thin leather. A long coat hung from his shoulders, and in his hand he carried a staff carved with old runes. His name was Elias, though no one in the village yet knew it. He had walked for days, following the winding road through hills and bogs, and his face showed the weight of both journey and memory. At the inn, the cracked lantern, he pushed through the door, brushing frost from his beard. A fire burned low in the hearth, and 3 villagers sat hunched around mugs of ale. Their talk stopped at once. "Evening," Elias said, his voice steady, though his legs begged for rest. "I'd pay for a bed if you've one to spare." The innkeeper, a stout woman with a kerchief tied about her hair, hesitated before nodding. "We've a room, aye, but it's dear, 2 shillings. He handed her 3. "And food, if you can manage it." She softened at the sight of the coins and bustled toward the kitchen. The villagers resumed their murmured conversation, but Elias felt their eyes linger. He set his staff by the wall and sat near the fire. One of the men, gray-bearded and thick-fingered, leaned closer. "Not many strangers come through this road," he said. "What's your business?" "Passing through," Elias replied. "Looking for work, perhaps, or simply a place to stop for the winter." The man grunted. "You'd best keep to the village. Nothing good beyond it." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Beyond?" The graybeard glanced at his companions, then lowered his voice. "The house, out past the hedge." At this, the innkeeper returned, setting down a plate of bread and stew. "Don't fill his head with tales," she chided. "Let the man eat." But Elias was already curious. "What sort of house?" The graybeard shook his head. Chapter 2. Whispers at the Inn. The cracked lantern creaked with the night wind. Elias lay awake, staring at the low-ceiling beams above his bed. Every few moments, a faint sound stirred in the silence. A whistle through the chimney, the shifting of wood. Yet beneath those natural noises was something else, something slower and more deliberate, a whisper. He sat up, heart quickened, and listened. At first, he thought it came from the hall, but the more he strained his ears, the clearer it became that the sound was not from within the inn at all. It drifted through the window, faint and thin, carried on the breath of the wind. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable, coaxing, calling. Elias rose, padded across the floorboards, and eased the shutter open a crack. The village street stretched dark and empty beneath the moonlight. Far off, beyond the hedgerow, beyond the line of trees, he saw the shape of the house, a hulk of shadow against the paler fields, crouched like an animal at rest. The whisper seemed to flow from that direction. He shut the shutter with a snap, breathing hard. "Stories," he muttered to himself, "just stories." But even as he climbed back beneath the quilt, he could not shake the feeling that the house had spoken to him, that it knew he had arrived. In the morning, he found the common room nearly empty. Only the innkeeper remained, wiping down the bar with brisk strokes. Elias approached, setting a coin upon the wood. "I heard something in the night, out by the hedge." The innkeeper stiffened. "You keep away from that place, traveler. Folk who listen too close don't last." "You mean the house?" She slammed her rag down. "I mean what I said. Some things aren't meant to be poked at. You'd do well to forget it." But Elias did not forget. Curiosity was a fire in his chest, slow but unrelenting. By the time he left the inn that morning, he had already decided he would see the house for himself.
Chapter 3. The Hedge Road. The road to the house wound through fields of withered grass and past old stone walls broken with moss. The air grew colder the farther Elias walked, though the sun stood high. Birds kept their distance. Not a single crow called, not a single sparrow darted from hedge to hedge. When he reached the tangle of briar and nettle that marked the village boundary, he paused. Beyond it lay the path to the house. He could see the roofline rising crooked above the growth, the chimney leaning as though in surrender. A faint pressure pushed against his ears, like the heaviness before a storm. The silence was so complete it roared. Then came the whisper, not from within his head nor from his imagination, but from the very air itself, curling around the thorns and stones. "Don't come closer." Elias gripped his staff. "So it's true," he murmured. The whisper swelled. "Turn back. Leave this place. His skin prickled, but his boots moved forward. Step by step, he pressed through the hedge, brambles scratching his coat. The air grew colder still, until his breath misted before him. He stood now on the path, the house looming larger, the windows dark and hollow. It was waiting.
Chapter 4. The Doorway. The steps sagged beneath Elias's weight as he climbed them. Paint peeled from the door in long strips, the wood swollen with rain. He lifted a hand and pressed it to the surface. The house shivered. It was not the wind. The wood vibrated faintly under his palm, as though the structure itself was breathing. Elias drew back, but before he could retreat, the latch clicked, the door creaked inward, swinging wide with a slow groan. Darkness yawned within. Elias hesitated, heart pounding. Then, setting his jaw, he raised his staff and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, heavy with the scent of rot. A great hall stretched before him, its floorboards warped and buckled. Cobwebs veiled the corners like curtains. Above, the balcony of the second floor sagged, its railing broken in places. And all around, faint as breath, came the murmur. Go back. Go back. Elias swallowed hard. No. His voice echoed strangely, swallowed almost at once by the house's sighing tone. He pressed forward, boots thudding against the soft wood. His candle flickered, casting trembling shadows. Something shifted above him. A footstep or the groan of a beam? He could not tell. But the murmur grew louder, circling him, threading through the hall like invisible fingers. Leave while you can. Elias gripped his staff tighter. I came for answers, and I'll have them. Chapter 5. The Sitting Room. He found it to the right of the hall, a sitting room frozen in decay. Chairs slumped in corners, their cushions split. A fireplace gaped black and cold. On the mantel lay shards of porcelain, perhaps once a vase, now broken and gray with dust. Elias lit a candle stub from his lantern and set it on the mantel. The flame cast a small circle of light, chasing back the gloom. He lowered himself into one of the chairs, its frame creaking in protest. The whisper filled the room like a sigh. Do not stay here. Why? Elias asked aloud. His own voice startled him in the silence. What waits above? The house groaned. Boards flexed in the ceiling. For a moment he thought he heard words strained and far away. "Not for you. Not for you." Elias leaned forward. Then for who? No answer came, only the settling creaks of the house. Yet Elias thought he felt eyes upon him, hundreds, weightless and cold, watching from the cracks, the corners, the unseen spaces between beams. He shivered but did not flee. Instead, he set his staff across his knees and waited, heart beating like a drum. The fireless hearth gaped before him, and above it the darkened stairs beckoned. Soon he knew he would climb them, but not yet. First, he would listen to what the house had to say. Chapter 6. The First Night. Elias remained in the sitting room as the night thickened. The candles sputtered, and the air grew so cold his breath fogged before him. Outside, the wind rattled loose shutters, but inside the house, the sound was stranger. The susurrus of whispers layered atop one another, a chorus of voices without bodies. He leaned forward, listening. Some words he could not make out, but others pressed clear into his ears. "Don't stay, not here, not again." "Not again?" Elias murmured. "What happened before?" The floor above creaked sharply, like a footstep. Elias's hand shot to his staff. His candle flame shrank, quivering, as if something had passed in front of it, though the air was still. "Show yourself," Elias demanded, though his voice betrayed unease. Silence followed, thick, tense silence. And then, from the far corner of the room, a chair shifted half an inch across the floor. Elias froze. The whisper returned, low and aching. "Don't go upstairs." He remained awake until dawn, sitting rigid in the broken chair, watching the staircase as the voices ebbed and swelled. Only when pale light leaked through the grime-smeared windows did the murmurs fade, leaving the house in brittle quiet. Chapter 7. The Villagers' Warnings. In the morning, Elias left the house and returned to the village, weary and pale. He had barely slept, and yet his curiosity burned hotter than ever. The villagers eyed him as he entered the cracked lantern. He looked back at them, daring them to speak. At last, the graybeard from before muttered, "You went there." Elias took a seat. "I did." The innkeeper shook her head sharply. Foolish man, that place doesn't let go once it has you. What is it then? Elias asked. Who built it? Why is it abandoned? The villagers shifted uncomfortably, trading uneasy looks. Finally, a younger man spoke, voice hushed. The family that lived there vanished, gone overnight. Plates still on the table, clothes still on the line. Some say they left, but no tracks were ever found. Others, the graybeard cut in, say the house took them. The innkeeper silenced them all with a glare. Enough of this, we don't speak of it. But Elias leaned forward. The whispers told me not to go upstairs. What's there?
Chapter 8. The Return. Despite their warnings, Elias returned that evening. The sun sank low as he crossed the hedge road, and the cold struck him sharper than before. The house loomed in twilight, windows dark and waiting. When he entered, the door shut behind him of its own accord. The echo reverberated like the toll of a bell. Elias forced his steps steady as he moved into the sitting room once more. This time, he did not sit. He set his lantern high, its light scattering shadows across the walls. "I am not afraid," he said, though the words rang hollow. The whisper surged immediately. "Leave, leave. It's not yours. It's never yours." Elias clenched his jaw. What is upstairs? Who waits there? For a moment, the house went utterly still. The air thickened, heavy as water. Then, faint but distinct, came a reply. "We wait." A sound followed, slow, dragging footsteps above, pacing the length of the corridor.
Chapter 9. The Mark on the Wall. Elias lit another candle and began to explore. Dust clouded with each step. Cobwebs clung to his sleeves. The whispers rose and fell, guiding him like a tide. In the dining room, he found a long table draped in a gray sheet of dust. Plates and cups remained, some overturned, some still upright, as if a meal had ended abruptly. He brushed dust from one cup and froze. Scratched into the wood beneath it was a single word: run. Elias felt his skin crawl. He lifted his lantern to the wall, where deeper grooves marred the plaster. Lines and shapes, desperate scratches, like fingernails dragged over and over. Among them, half hidden, was another word: upstairs. The whisper coiled around him. Don't go, don't follow, don't see. He traced the scratches with his fingertips. They were deep, gouged with panic. Whoever had carved them had fought to leave a message. Too late to turn back, Elias murmured. I have to know. Chapter 10. The Shadow on the Stairs. That night, Elias positioned his chair in view of the staircase. He sat, lantern at his side, staff across his knees. The hours dragged. The house shifted and breathed, its whispers threading through the silence. And then he saw it. At the top of the stairs, framed in the gloom, stood a shape. Not solid, shadow only, but tall, humanoid, its head bent as though regarding him. Chapter 11. The Second Floor. At dawn, Elias could no longer resist. He lit 2 lanterns, tightened the strap of his coat, and climbed the staircase. Each step groaned, sagging under his weight, as if trying to push him back down. The railing trembled beneath his touch. The corridor stretched long, lined with doors. Some were cracked open, others tight shut. A carpet lay rotting down the center, its pattern long since eaten by moths. The air was colder here, sharp as ice in his lungs. The first door he opened revealed a child's room. A small bed leaned against the wall, its sheets gray with dust. Toys lay scattered, a wooden horse missing a leg, a doll with no eyes. The whispers gathered around him, urgent, frantic. Don't wake them. Don't touch. Wake who? Elias demanded. But no answer came. The next room was a bedroom, the wardrobe open, clothing still hanging, as if its owner had vanished mid-choice. A mirror in the corner was veiled with dust. Elias wiped it with his sleeve, and saw, for a flicker, not his reflection, but a woman standing behind him. He spun. The room was empty. The whispers swelled into laughter, low, broken, bitter. Elias clenched his jaw. You want me afraid, but I will not flee. Chapter 12. The Locked Door. At the end of the corridor stood the door that was different. It was not warped by damp or eaten by mold. Its wood was smooth, dark, polished as though cared for. And it was locked. Elias tried the handle. It did not budge. He pressed his shoulder against it. The door held. The whispers surged violently. Not for you. Never for you. Stay away. He traced the keyhole with his finger. What's behind here? The air thickened, pressing on his chest. The house shuddered, boards flexing underfoot. Death. That single word drove cold through his veins. Yet his resolve hardened. Chapter 13. The Room of Ash. The lantern light cut into the gloom. The room was bare, its walls blackened with soot. In the center lay a circle of ash, disturbed as though something had once knelt there. Elias stepped closer, the crunch of char beneath his boots loud in the silence. On the wall above the circle, words had been scrawled in a jagged hand. We are still here. Elias's breath hitched. He turned slowly, the hair rising on his arms. Shadows clung to the corners, darker than lantern light should allow. The whispers shifted, no longer warning, but pleading. Join us, end the waiting, free us. He shook his head. What do you want from me? A wind rose in the sealed room, extinguishing his lantern. The whispers roared into a single voice, filling the dark. Stay. Shapes flickered, faces in the soot, eyes in the ash, hands reaching. Elias stumbled back, staff raised. He struck the floor, the wood booming. I am not yours! The faces shrieked and vanished. The wind died. Only silence remained, thick and choking. Chapter 14. The Truth of the House. Elias fled the ash room, heart pounding. He stumbled into the corridor, gasping for breath. The whispers had gone, leaving only a hollow quiet. He descended the stairs and collapsed in the sitting room, staring into the empty fireplace. At last, a voice distinct from the others spoke behind him, a woman's, clear and sorrowful. We were taken. Elias spun. A figure stood in the doorway, pale, translucent, eyes hollow with grief. She wore a gown of another century. The house keeps us. It whispers because we whisper. It warned you because we remember what waits above. What waits? Elias asked, voice hoarse. The house itself, she said. It feeds on us, on the family, on all who enter.
Chapter 15. The Last Whisper. Elias rose at dawn, knowing he had only one choice. If the house lived, it could be killed. If it breathed, its breath could be stilled. He gathered oil from the village smith, ignoring their protests. He carried it to the house as the sun climbed, the whispers stirring awake in the walls. Don't. He poured oil across the floors, up the stairs, into the ash room itself. His lantern flame trembled in his hand. The whispers grew frantic, anguished. We will burn with it. Don't do this. Don't leave us to silence. I free you, Elias whispered, one way or another. He touched flame to the oil. Fire leapt eagerly, racing along the boards. The house shrieked. Not the whispers. No, the house itself. A groan like stones splitting. A scream like timbers torn apart. The voices wailed, rose in agony, then in relief, then in silence. Elias stumbled out as the roof collapsed behind him. Smoke poured skyward. Flames devoured the ivy, the windows, the walls. The house crumbled in on itself, its whispers dying into ash. He stood at the edge of the hedge road, watching until only embers glowed. Then he turned, staff in hand, and walked back toward the village. The wind stirred. For the first time, it carried no voices, only quiet. And for Elias, that was answer enough. Did you enjoy that short story? I hope you found it spooky. Now, time for another tale.
Chapter 1. Arrival. The house stood at the edge of the small town, its silhouette hunched against the gray sky like a tired old sentinel. Its paint was faded, streaked with years of rain, and the windows were clouded with grime. Yet something about it drew you in, a quiet promise of solitude. You parked the car at the gravel driveway, the tires crunching underfoot, and stepped out, taking in the scent of wet leaves and decaying wood. "This place," you muttered to yourself, squinting up at the crooked roofline. "It's perfect." The front door was heavy and groaned like it hadn't been opened in years. Your keys rattled as you found the lock, and with a reluctant push, the door gave way. Dust danced in the sunlight, slanting through the cracks in the blinds. The air smelled faintly of mildew, of old paper, of something almost metallic you couldn't place. You dropped your bag near the entrance and began exploring. Each room had its own personality. The living room had a fireplace with blackened bricks, a few old chairs that sagged as if bearing memories. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing layers of past paint in muted blues and yellows. Footsteps echoed oddly, and you wondered if the floorboards were uneven or if the echo was different somehow. "This is going to be my little sanctuary," you said aloud, as if speaking to the house itself. "A place to think, to write." The kitchen smelled of rust and dampness. Cabinets creaked when you opened them, and you found a few old utensils coated in dust. A small dining table stood in the center, its surface scarred with rings of long-forgotten mugs. You ran your hand along it, the wood cool under your fingers, and for a moment you thought you heard a soft exhale behind you. Turning sharply, there was nothing, just the window letting in the wind, rattling the leaves outside. You shivered, more from anticipation than fear. "I'm alone," you said, forcing yourself to smile. "It's just an old house. Nothing more." Yet, as the darkness settled, a subtle sensation pricked at the edge of your awareness. The house wasn't quite silent. Not entirely. Somewhere deep within its walls, there seemed to be a presence, patient and still. And as the darkness settled, you swore you heard a faintest whisper, barely audible, as if carried on the wind through the cracks of the old siding. "Hello."
Chapter 2. The First Night. Night fell quickly, the sky turning a bruised purple, then deep black. The wind outside had grown sharper, rattling the loose shutters and sending dry leaves tumbling across the driveway. You sat on the edge of the bed in the main bedroom, a cup of tea warming your hands, trying to shake the lingering unease from the day. "I'm just tired," you murmured, forcing a smile. "Old house, new place, nerves." The shadows in the room were long and strange, cast by the weak glow of a single lamp. They seemed ordinary at first, stretching across the walls and ceiling, but then you noticed the corners. Some shapes didn't belong. The shadows curved oddly, curling where no object existed to cast them. You blinked, rubbed your eyes, but they didn't vanish. A soft sound, almost imperceptible, drew your attention. At first, you thought it was the wind, a faint, rhythmic sigh through the old beams. Then you heard it clearly. Hello. Your heart skipped. You froze, gripping the mug tighter. The voice was soft, like a breath just behind your ear, yet the room was empty. You swallowed hard, trying to convince yourself it was your imagination. Probably just the wind, you said aloud, though your voice sounded unconvincing even to your own ears. You stood and walked toward the door, checking the hallway. The floorboards groaned beneath your weight, echoing far too loudly. The hallway was empty. The darkness beyond the bedroom doors seemed deeper, denser, almost swallowing the faint glow of the lamp. You exhaled shakily and returned to the bed. Sitting back down, you opened your laptop, hoping the hum and light would keep the unease at bay. You tried to focus on a blank document, typing a few notes about the house, the floors, the peeling wallpaper. But every few minutes, a soft creak made you look up. Floorboards that shouldn't have moved, or the sound of a door gently swinging open somewhere upstairs. Then a whisper again, closer this time. I'm watching. Your blood ran cold. You spun around, but the room was still empty. You noticed the shadows again, darker now, stretching toward you in slow, deliberate movements. They weren't cast by the lamp or the moon. They seemed to pulse, reaching for the edges of the room. Heart hammering, you stood and switched on every light. Some flickered, but most held, cutting the shadows into ragged fragments. You called out, your voice trembling. Is anyone there? Hello? Silence answered, then a soft, mocking sigh drifting through the air like smoke. Not anyone, just me. You grabbed a notebook from the bedside table, scribbling down the words, trying to ground yourself in reality. Maybe if I write it, I can prove I'm not losing my mind, you thought. Hours passed in a haze of nervous pacing and whispers that never fully formed into words, but always hovered at the edge of hearing. You finally curled under the blankets, lights blazing, pretending to sleep. The shadows lingered in the corners, patient and still. Somewhere deep within the house, behind the walls, something watched, waiting. And as sleep finally tugged at your eyelids, a final whisper brushed your ear. Good night. I'll see you soon.
Chapter 3. The Shadows. Morning came with a gray, lifeless light spilling through the blinds. You woke stiff and tense, the memory of whispers lingering at the edge of your mind. The bed felt different, heavier somehow, as if something had lain there beside you. You shook it off, telling yourself it was just a dream. But the evidence in the house suggested otherwise. The bedroom door, which you were certain you had closed the night before, was ajar. The chair near the desk, positioned neatly in the corner, was now slightly turned. And on the floor, a small pile of dust had shifted, forming a faint line leading toward the hallway. Okay, I'm imagining things, you muttered aloud, pacing. It's an old house. Dust moves. You decided to document everything, pulling out the notebook from the bedside table. The pen scratched across the page as you wrote, "Shadows move. Whispers at night. Floorboards creak when no one is walking." The act of writing helped, at least for a moment, but as you reached the middle of the page, a subtle movement in the corner of your eye froze you. The shadow near the far wall had shifted. It wasn't tied to the lamp or window. It elongated, curling in a way that defied logic. It felt aware. "What are you?" you whispered, your voice trembling. No answer, just the faintest rustle like fabric brushing against floorboards. You took a cautious step toward the wall, and the shadow recoiled, then spread along the baseboard, reaching toward the hallway. By afternoon, you had explored every room again, checking for drafts, for sunlight angles, for any logical explanation. There was none. Every time you turned your back, the shadows subtly changed. An arm of darkness stretching slightly farther, curling upward as if studying you. "What are you?" you whispered, your voice trembling. No answer, just the faintest rustle, like fabric brushing against floorboards. You took a cautious step toward the wall, and the shadow recoiled, then spread along the baseboard, reaching toward the hallway. By afternoon, you had explored every room again, checking for drafts, for sunlight angles, for any logical explanation. There was none. Every time you turned your back, the shadows subtly changed. An arm of darkness stretching slightly farther, curling upward as if studying you. You called a friend, hoping to hear a rational voice. "I swear it's the house," you said, pacing in front of the window. I don't know. I feel like someone's watching me." On the other end, your friend chuckled nervously. "Watching you? It's a house, not a horror movie. Maybe you're just tired." "Maybe," you admitted, though your stomach nodded. "But I think it's more than that." By evening, the atmosphere shifted. The lamp in the living room flickered wildly, then went out, leaving the space drenched in shadows. The air grew colder, carrying the faint metallic scent you hadn't noticed before. You shivered, pulling your sweater tighter. Then came a sound, a soft, deliberate tap on the wall behind you. You froze. 1, 2, 3 taps, slow and deliberate. You spun, but there was no one, only the shadows stretching toward you, pulsing faintly, as if breathing. You spoke aloud, trying to ground yourself. "I'm not afraid. I know you're here, but I won't let you scare me." A whisper followed, almost intimately, chilling in its intimacy. "You don't have a choice." Your hands shook as you wrote Chapter 4, The Wait. The next morning, sunlight seemed thin and weak, barely warming the wooden floors. You awoke with a start, the blankets tangled around your legs, and an odd heaviness pressed against your chest. For a moment, you thought it was just a nightmare, a lingering shadow of sleep, but the pressure remained. Sitting up, you glanced around the room. Nothing moved. The air smelled faintly of iron, like blood or wet soil. You shivered and swung your legs over the edge of the bed. The weight lifted as soon as you touched the floor, leaving a hollow emptiness behind. "Okay," you muttered, rubbing your eyes. "That wasn't real." But the evidence told a different story. On the bedside table, the notebook had flipped open on its own. The pen was lying nearby, as if it had been dropped mid-sentence. The words you had written last night, "I'll wait, always," were still scrawled in hurried letters. And beneath them, fresh words appeared, uneven and jagged. "I never left." Your heart leapt. You scanned the room, half expecting someone or something to emerge from the shadows. The air was still, but thick, heavy, almost tactile. Later, while making tea in the kitchen, you felt it again. A cold draft brushed your neck, though every window and door was closed. You spun around. The room was empty, but the shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners, stretching along the floor as if seeking you. "Stop it," you whispered, voice trembling. "I know you're here. I don't know what you are, but I can't let you." A faint, almost playful sigh cut you off. "Let me what?" The sound made the hair on your arms rise. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, presence, intent. You gripped the counter, knuckles white, staring into the corner of the room where the shadows seemed darkest. That night, sleep became a battle. You pulled every blanket around yourself, propping pillows as barriers. The house groaned around you, floorboards creaking in impossible patterns. And then the weight returned, pressing on the bed beside you, cold and suffocating. You tried to speak, reasoning aloud. I won't give you power over me. You don't exist. But the whisper came, low and deliberate, almost against your ear. I exist because you see me. Your breath caught. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet something rooted you in place. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against your skin. You felt a faint brush against your arm, a touch soft, deliberate, ice cold, and you jerked away. The shadows on the walls pulsed in response, like they were alive, watching, learning. Hours passed in mere silence. Every time you tried to close your eyes, you felt it shift beside you, an invisible presence.
Chapter 5. The Mirror. By the 5th day, the house no longer felt empty. It felt aware. Each step you took echoed strangely, as if following its own rhythm, as if the floorboards themselves were observing. You tried to rationalize it. Old houses are quirky. Uneven floors, drafts, settling beams. Nothing more. But rational thought was growing fragile. Shadows moved differently now, curling and stretching even in broad daylight. The air felt heavier near certain corners, the faint metallic scent lingering. And then you noticed it, the mirror in the upstairs bedroom. It hadn't been cracked when you arrived, or at least you thought it hadn't. But now a thin line ran through its surface, jagged like a fault in the earth. You stepped closer, brushing your fingers against the cold glass. The reflection stared back at you, but something was off. Your movements lagged slightly, almost imperceptibly, like the reflection had a moment of its own. You raised your hand, and the image mimicked you too slowly. A shiver ran down your spine. Okay, that's just my imagination. Lag, light, fatigue. Yet as you turned away, you caught it again. The reflection lingered a moment longer than it should have, watching. And then, just when you thought it was gone, it smiled. Not you. Something else. You stumbled back, heart hammering, and the shadows in the room seemed to twist toward the mirror. For a terrifying instant, it felt as if the dark shapes were feeding from the reflection, growing heavier, darker, more substantial. That night, you couldn't sleep in the bedroom with the mirror. You carried a mattress downstairs, dragging it into the living room, surrounded by lamps. The shadows were still there, pooling in the corners, moving with a sinister fluidity, but the bright lights kept them fragmented, weak. Even so, the whispers didn't stop. You can't hide. You see me. I see you. You tried calling a friend again, voice trembling. I think something's wrong with the house, with me. The shadows, they move, and the mirror... There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure you're okay? Your friend asked cautiously. Maybe take a day off, get some sleep. Stress? No, you interrupted, voice rising. It's not stress. I don't know what it is, but it's real. The mirror, my reflection changes. It watches me. The line went dead, static, and then silence. You dropped the phone, staring into the darkness around the living room. Chapter 6. The Voice Knows. By the 6th night, exhaustion had settled into your bones. Every muscle ached from pacing, from sleepless hours, from the tension of being watched. You had tried to rationalize, tried to flee, tried to call a friend, but the presence was patient. It had no need to rush. It
could wait.
You were curled on the mattress in the living room, lights dim but flickering with anxiety, notebook open. Your pen scratched furiously across the pages. Observations, sketches of shadows, diagrams of the mirror and its distortions. Yet, even as you wrote, a subtle voice threaded through the quiet, soft enough to be mistaken for your own thoughts. "You're tired. You shouldn't fight me." You froze, hands suspended above the paper. That wasn't your thought. It was deliberate, external, coaxing. Your stomach nodded. "No, you're not real." "I am," it replied, faint and almost gentle. "I've always been here. I know you. I see you." Your breath caught. You thought back to small moments over the past week, the shifted dust, the altered shadows, the cold weight on the bed, and realized with a jolt that it had observed you from the very first night. Every habit, every routine, every movement. The air thickened, heavy and moist, pressing against your skin. The shadows on the walls pulsed in rhythm with your heartbeat. You tried to reason. "It's learning from me, yes, but it can't leave the house." Then the whispers became suggestions. "Stand. Go to the upstairs bedroom. Look in the mirror." A surge of panic coursed through you. The idea was horrifying, but strangely compelling. You shook your head, whispering aloud, "No, I won't. I can't." "You can," it said, sharper this time. "You want to, don't you?" The shadows stirred in response, writhing along the walls, reaching, pulsing. Your hands shook violently. You grabbed a chair and pressed it against the doorway to the stairs, as if a piece of furniture could keep something that didn't exist out. Hours passed. You tried to sleep, tried to ignore it, tried to convince yourself it was just a hallucination born of isolation. But the voice was relentless, threading into your mind, repeating your own private thoughts before you had spoken them. "You're afraid. I know you're afraid. But afraid is useful. Afraid keeps you here. Afraid keeps me here." You whispered to yourself, voice trembling, "Stop. I won't." The shadows in the corner of the living room thickened, folding in on themselves, coalescing into a vaguely human shape. Your heart pounded. It was not fully formed, no, not yet, but it mirrored your posture, your tension, your fear. "I know you," it breathed. "Every thought, every dream. You cannot hide, you cannot escape." You pressed your hands over your ears, shaking, whispering into the dark, into the air that now felt solid. "I won't let you control me. I won't."
The learning. By the 7th day, the house had become a maze of unease. Each room seemed subtly different from the last time you'd been there. Objects were never exactly where you remembered leaving them. Books turned face down. Chairs slightly angled. Curtains swaying when no draft existed. The shadows were no longer just in corners. They slithered along walls, stretched across ceilings, and occasionally pooled in the middle of the floor like dark liquid. You began to realize something terrifying. The house was learning. It observed your habits, your fears, your attempts to escape. Each night it tested you. Every morning, small changes in the environment reminded you of its presence. The first overt act came during breakfast. You poured coffee into a mug and set it down on the table. When you turned back, it had slid toward the center of the table, as if nudged by unseen fingers. A chill ran down your spine. "No, not real," you muttered, but your voice lacked conviction. Later, you tried to distract yourself by cleaning, moving boxes, anything to reclaim a sense of control. But as you carried a box upstairs, you glimpsed a shadow dart across the wall behind you.
faster than a blink. The hairs on your arms stood on end. It wasn't just watching now, it was practicing. You realized that the longer you stayed, the more skilled it became at predicting your movements, anticipating your reactions. The whispers had evolved too. They no longer just commented or suggested, they taunted, mimicked, and tested. "Careful," it whispered one night as you climbed the stairs. "Slow. Don't drop it. Don't look behind you." Your stomach twisted. You spun around. Nothing. But the floorboards creaked in a pattern you hadn't made. The shadows writhed at the edge of your vision, mocking, studying. By afternoon, you had taken to writing everything down, desperate to anchor yourself. Notes, sketches, diagrams, all meant to prove that something unnatural was unfolding. Yet even as you scribbled furiously, you felt its attention, intangible and suffocating. The first near physical encounter came at night. You were climbing into bed when the blankets shifted violently, as if something underneath was rolling. You yelped and threw them off. The air had grown cold, colder than ever before, and a faint pressure pressed against your legs, stopping just short of touch. "Almost," whispered the voice, softer than before, yet saturated with expectation. "So close. Keep still. Don't resist." You bolted upright, heart hammering. The shadows along the walls throbbed, folding inward, as if alive. They had learned the rhythm of your fear, the timing of your breaths, the hesitation in your movements. And they had begun to manipulate your environment with precision. A window that had been closed swung open on its own. A chair that had been in the corner now blocked the bedroom door. Small things, subtle things, each designed to remind you that the house, and whatever lived within it, was in command. You realized with a sickening clarity, resistance only sharpened its focus. Fear fed it. Observation empowered it. And every attempt at normalcy.
Chapter 8. The Isolation. By the 8th day, the boundaries between the house and the outside world had begun to blur. You had stopped answering calls from friends. Messages went unread. Even the thought of leaving felt wrong, as if the house itself tightened around you, whispering insistently that there was nowhere safe beyond its walls. The shadows had grown bolder. They no longer confined themselves to corners or walls. Sometimes, in the corner of your eye, you would see them pooling at the foot of the stairs or near the doorway, waiting, patient, observant. They knew your habits, followed your gaze, anticipated your steps. The whispers had become constant companions. They spoke in tones you recognized. Your voice, the voice of your mother, your own inner thoughts, blurring the lines between memory and reality. "Don't go outside. They can't protect you. You belong here." You shook your head, pressing your hands against your ears. The voice mimicked your protest. "No. Yes. Maybe. You don't know. I know." Attempts to leave the house became exercises in futility. The front door that had been heavy now seemed to resist your hands, as if the house itself had gained weight. Windows refused to budge, as though welded shut. Even the gravel driveway outside seemed miles away, elongated by some invisible force, twisting distances and angles until the world beyond the walls felt impossibly far. Sleep became fragmented and hallucinatory. Dreams bled into waking moments. In one moment you were climbing stairs that led to rooms you didn't recognize. In another, the shadows reached through the floorboards, brushing your feet, curling around your ankles. You began talking to yourself, arguing with the whispers, pleading with the house. "I don't belong here. You can't have me." The reply came almost immediately, soft, teasing, omnipresent. You are mine. Even if you close your eyes, even if you run, even if you scream, you cannot leave. You will belong. You will see. You will remember. And as you pressed your face into your knees, the shadows leaned closer, stretching, waiting, patient. Outside, the world continued, oblivious. Inside, you were alone, completely. Chapter 9. The First Contact. The night was darker than usual, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something metallic you couldn't place. The wind outside had fallen silent, leaving the house unnervingly still. You sat on the mattress in the living room, notebook open, pen trembling in your hand, trying to make sense of the last 8 days. The shadows had grown bold, moving with a purpose that no longer felt accidental. They pooled in corners, stretched along walls, and occasionally reached toward the center of the floor, where you sat, frozen and aware of every breath. Then it happened. A sudden pressure against your shoulder, cold and firm, caused you to gasp and spin around. Nothing was there. But the shadows responded. One of them lifted from the corner, twisting into a vaguely humanoid shape. It hovered in the periphery of the lamplight, its form hazy, but undeniably watching. "Do not be afraid," it whispered, soft but certain, almost intimate. You froze, gripping the edge of the mattress. What do you want?" The shadow pulsed, writhing slowly. "I want you to see me, to remember." A faint breeze brushed across your skin, though every window was closed. You flinched as something unseen traced a finger along your arm. The air smelled of iron, of soil, of something you couldn't name, and it pressed closer, almost tangible. "I've waited," it said, voice threading into your thoughts. "Every night, every hour, watching, learning. I am patient." You stammered, "Why me? Why this house?" "Because you can see me. Because you feel me. Because you fear me." It pulsed, stretching, and the shadows around the room rippled like liquid. The floorboards beneath you seemed to shift imperceptibly, tilting your balance. You stumbled, catching yourself on the mattress. "Do not resist," it whispered. "Resistance is unnecessary." The air grew colder, and the pressure increased. You could feel the weight of its presence pressing into your chest, wrapping around your limbs, testing the boundaries of your skin. It was not violent, yet, but it was deliberate, a patient study of your reactions. I won't," but the shadows responded instantly. One dark limb of shadow reached toward the notebook, flipping it open. The pen lifted from the page as if guided by invisible fingers. Words appeared in uneven, jagged letters. "You belong. You always have." A shiver ran through you. The shadows swirled, the lamp flickered, and for the first time, the entity's form seemed almost complete, humanoid yet featureless, hovering mere inches from. Chapter 10. The dreams begin. That night, sleep arrived reluctantly, heavy with dread and anticipation. The shadows in the corners seemed thicker, darker, pulsing gently as if in rhythm with your heartbeat. You tried to lie still beneath the blankets, clutching your notebook like a talisman against the entity that had made its presence undeniable. And then, as your eyes closed, the world shifted. You were no longer in the living room. The walls had melted into darkness, the floor beneath your feet soft and uneven, like walking on damp moss. Shadows stretched impossibly long, curling toward you from every direction. A voice whispered, familiar and intimate, threading through your thoughts. Welcome again. Sleep and see me. Your stomach twisted. You tried to move, but your limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The shadows pulsed, writhing along the floor, walls, and ceiling, and the air smelled metallic, earthy, alive. You wanted to scream, but your voice did not emerge. Then, the dream, or was it, shifted. You were standing at the top of the staircase, looking down into the living room. The room was empty. Yet from the corners, shadows began to pool, rising slowly, forming vague shapes, indistinct, human-like, watching, waiting. You felt them learning you again, observing every hesitation, every blink, every breath. Do not resist, the whisper said, softer now, almost coaxing. I am patient. I know you. I see you, even when you close your eyes. A sense of vertigo gripped you. You stumbled down the stairs, and the shadows followed, stretching, folding, reaching. The floorboards beneath your feet were uneven, shifting subtly with each step, making the descent feel endless. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing in time with your heartbeat. And then the mirror appeared. It was not the mirror upstairs, but a new one, massive, filling the room with its cracked reflection. Your own image stared back, but behind you, the shadows coalesced into a humanoid figure, featureless, yet unmistakably there. Its presence pressed into your mind, speaking without words. Remember me. You belong to me. You always have. You cannot leave. You turned, trying to flee, but the shadows stretched and tangled around your legs, binding you to the spot. Panic surged, yet a strange compulsion urged you to look into the mirror. Reluctantly, you did. The reflection was not just you, it was the entity itself, layered over your features, a distorted double with pulsing darkness where eyes should be. The whispers became a chorus, repeating thoughts you hadn't spoken, desires you hadn't admitted even to yourself. You see me now. You will see me again. Sleep, and you will belong. You awoke with a gasp. Drenched in sweat, the notebook still clutched in trembling hands. Sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds, but the room felt heavier than ever. The shadows in the corners pulsed faintly, patient, waiting. And you realized with a chill that the entity had not just visited your waking hours. It had begun to claim your dreams, threading its presence into sleep itself. Nightfall no longer promised rest. It promised confrontation, subtle and inescapable, within the very landscape of your mind. You shivered beneath the blankets, understanding the truth with a sinking certainty. The house, the shadows, the voice, they were no longer confined to walls and floors. They were inside you, shaping your thoughts, your fears, and your dreams. Sleep, it whispered once more, almost tenderly. Sleep and remember, I will wait.
Chapter 11. Nightmares Made Real. By the 11th night, sleep had become a battleground. Your eyelids drooped with exhaustion, but each attempt at rest was met with the same suffocating presence. The shadows in the corners of the living room seemed to pulse with anticipation, stretching subtly whenever you moved, as if aware of your thoughts. That night, when you finally closed your eyes, the dream arrived immediately. You were no longer in the living room, nor in any room you recognized. Instead, you stood in an endless hallway, the walls dark and slick, the floor uneven and wet beneath your bare feet. A dim greenish light emanated from nowhere, illuminating nothing clearly, but the sense of being watched was absolute. From the far end, shapes emerged, humanoid, featureless, shadows coalescing with purpose. They glided silently, moving closer, folding and twisting as if alive. One reached toward you, tendrils of darkness brushing your shoulders, cold and suffocating. "Do you remember me?" the voice whispered, threading directly into your mind. "Do you see me now?" You tried to run, but the floor buckled, stretching unnaturally, slowing your steps. Every shadow mirrored your movements, learning, anticipating, taunting. Panic surged through you as the hallway seemed endless. And then the mirror appeared, tall, cracked, stretching across the width of the hall. You stared into it. The reflection was not you. It was yourself, distorted and overlaid with the entity's features, shadows writhing beneath your skin. It reached through the glass, and a tendril of darkness brushed your cheek, real, tangible, even in the dream. You bolted upright in the mattress, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Sunlight peeked through the blinds, but the shadows in the corners pulsed subtly, patiently, as if learning your response. The notebook trembled in your hands, and when you opened it, new words had appeared. You cannot escape, not in dreams, not in waking. I am everywhere you look. I am patient. I am learning. By day, the hallucinations persisted. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the hallway outside your bedroom. The cracked mirror upstairs reflected subtle movements that weren't yours. Small objects moved on their own. A chair that had been pushed against the wall now sat in the center of the room. A book lay open, with pages rearranged into sentences you didn't recognize. You spoke aloud to the empty house, your voice shaking. "This isn't real. None of this is real." The whisper returned instantly, soft and intimate. "It is as real as you allow. You see me now. You feel me. You are mine, and you will remember." By evening, you had abandoned the living room mattress and fled to the kitchen, barricading yourself against shadows that moved with more confidence now. Sleep was no longer optional. The body demanded it, but the entity had begun infiltrating even the briefest moments of rest. Every blink, every moment of distraction became an opportunity for it to test you, to mold you, to feed on fear. And as night fell, you realized the cruelest truth.
Chapter 12. The First Breaking. By the 12th day, exhaustion had become permanent, a living weight pressing into your bones. Sleep was no longer restorative. It was a battleground, a trap where shadows and whispers toyed with your mind. Every night, the entity infiltrated your dreams, each encounter more vivid, more intimate, more terrifying. During the day, reality itself seemed to bend. Shadows shifted unnaturally, stretching and folding, defying the light. Floorboards groaned under no weight. Mirrors reflected subtle distortions, your own movements slightly delayed, as if the reflection had a mind of its own. Objects moved silently, repositioned themselves, small but deliberate. You began to doubt everything. What was real? What was imagined? What belonged to you? You started talking aloud constantly, a futile attempt to anchor yourself. I am awake. This is real. I am awake. I am awake. The shadows pulsed in response, coiling at the corners of your vision. The voice came, threading directly into your thoughts. No, you are asleep. You have always been asleep. You cannot see me yet, but you will. You always will. Panic gripped you. You stumbled through the rooms, notebook in hand, scribbling observations frantically. Each word, each line was meant to ground you, but the entity had begun altering even that. Pages rearranged themselves overnight. Sentences twisted into new meanings. Words you hadn't written appeared. Breaking is good. Resistance is foolish. You belong. You slammed the notebook shut. The shadows thickened, swirling around the corners of the room, edges indistinct but moving with intent. You pressed your back against the wall, shaking, whispering, "I am not yours. You cannot have me. You already are." It whispered, soft, intimate, omnipresent. You will remember. You will belong. You will see. The first direct physical contact occurred that night. You awoke to a pressure against your chest, not subtle this time, firm and undeniable. Cold fingers brushed your arms and shoulders. You struggled, screamed silently, but the air seemed viscous, wrapping around you, binding your movements. The shadows leaned closer, coalescing into a form vaguely humanoid, tall and featureless. Its presence filled the room, pressing into your mind, threading through your thoughts, eroding the fragile boundary between self and entity. Breaking is necessary. Resistance only sharpens understanding. Sleep, and you will belong. It whispered. Your mind faltered, thoughts spinning. Hours, or was it minutes, passed in a haze of terror, uncertainty, and fatigue. When dawn finally crept weakly through the blinds, you were trembling uncontrollably, notebook clutched to your chest, body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The house had changed. The shadows were more confident, more fluid, more assertive. The entity had made contact, and it had begun to assert dominance over your waking life as well as your dreams. You understood with a bone-deep certainty. You were beginning to break, and once the breaking was complete, there would be no turning back. "Remember," the whisper said, fading as the first weak light filled the room. "You are mine, always mine."
Chapter 13. The Second Night. By the 13th night, the house felt alive in every sense. Every creak of the floorboards, every subtle draft, every flicker of shadow was deliberate. The entity was no longer content to linger in corners. It now manipulated the environment to keep you in a constant state of unease. You sat on the mattress in the living room, trembling, notebook open. Words jumbled across the pages. Shadows move independently. Mirrors reflect, not me. Sleep is no longer safe. You wrote frantically, hoping that documentation could preserve a shred of sanity. Then the whispers began again, threading into your thoughts before you even realized you were hearing them. Look at the walls. Look at the doors. Everything is mine. You are mine. You always were. The shadows stirred. One of them rose from the corner, tall and humanoid, faceless. It moved toward the mattress, folding the space around it like liquid. The air grew cold, thick, pressing into your lungs with every breath. "Sleep now," it coaxed, voice intimate and persistent. "Dream and you will see me." You wanted to resist, but exhaustion weighed heavily on your body. Every nerve screamed for rest, and the entity knew it. It whispered your thoughts, reading the desperation in your mind. You are tired.
You need to sleep. You want to sleep. Let me see you. Against your will, your eyelids dropped. Darkness swallowed the room. And then the dream began. Not gentle, not subtle, but immediate and absolute. You were no longer in the living room. You were standing in the upstairs hallway, the walls slick and impossibly long. Shadows pooled at the far end, coalescing into humanoid forms. One stepped forward, featureless, faceless, but undeniably present. "Do you see me?" The voice whispered, threading into your thoughts. "You always have. You always will." You tried to run, but the floor warped beneath your feet. Each step felt like wading through thick water. The shadows mirrored your movements, anticipating every turn, every hesitation. The walls pulsed as if breathing. The hallway stretched, elongated, becoming a maze of impossible geometry. A mirror appeared at the far end, fractured and cracked, reflecting yourself, but not the faceless figures hovering behind you. One reached toward you, tendrils of darkness brushing your shoulders, cold and suffocating. Panic surged, but the whispers continued, soft, coaxing. "Sleep and remember. You are mine. You cannot leave. You cannot resist." You awoke abruptly, sweat soaking your hair, body trembling. The shadows in the corners of the living room pulsed faintly, patient and still. The notebook had shifted on the mattress, opened to a new page with jagged words you didn't remember writing. "The second night is mine. You see now. You belong." You sat, huddled beneath blankets, realizing with sinking dread that the entity had begun using your dreams as another layer of its control. Sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a tool, a trap, a place where it could shape your thoughts.
Chapter 14. The Hallways Shift. By the 14th night, the house had fully claimed its dominion. Every step you took was uncertain. Hallways stretched and twisted. Doors led to rooms that had never existed, and shadows pooled where light should have reached. The air itself seemed alive, pressing against your chest, whispering in voices that mimicked your own thoughts. You stumbled through the living room, notebook clutched tightly, the pages filled with desperate, frantic scribbles. The entity had begun shaping reality itself, bending walls and floors, making space impossible to navigate. Each hallway looped back on itself. Each door opened into darkness or a mirrored version of the room you had just left. "You cannot leave," the voice whispered, omnipresent. "This house is mine. You are mine. You always were." Panic surged as you ran blindly down a corridor that seemed to stretch for miles. Shadows shifted at the edges of your vision, twisting into humanoid forms that mirrored your movements, anticipating your every turn. The house was no longer just a building. It was an organism, alive, sentient, and intent on consuming your mind. You tried to scream, but the walls absorbed sound. You pounded on doors that led only to empty space or mirrors reflecting distorted, faceless versions of yourself. The air smelled of iron and damp earth, thick with the presence of something patient and eternal. Then you saw it, the central hallway, impossible and infinite, lined with mirrors. Your own reflection stared back at you, but behind it, shadows moved independently, shaping themselves into grotesque, humanoid, faceless figures. One stepped closer, faceless, humanoid, pulsing with intent. The air around you grew icy, pressing in on all sides. "You see me now," the voice whispered directly in your mind. "You belong. You have always belonged. You cannot escape." You fell to your knees, clutching the notebook, trembling, realizing the full horror. The house was not just around you, it was inside you. Every step, every thought, every heartbeat had been observed, anticipated, and manipulated. The entity had learned you, shaped you, claimed you completely. You looked into one of the mirrors,
and for a fleeting instant you saw yourself as you had been before the house. Then the reflection shifted, and the shadows coalesced, consuming the image, folding you into the entity. A final whisper curled into your mind, intimate, patient, and eternal. Welcome home. You are mine. Always. The lights flickered, shadows pulsed, and the house exhaled. You no longer knew where the walls ended, where the floors began, or where you stopped and the shadows began. You were part of it now. The house had waited for you, learned you, and finally claimed you fully. Outside, the world continued, oblivious. Inside, the house waited, patient, eternal, and hungry. Its newest resident already woven into its darkness. And the whispers never ceased.